People say blood is thicker than water, but in the world of seven-figure real estate deals, blood is just leverage. My parents thought they could steal my masterpiece, a luxury wedding venue I spent 5 years building, to gift it to my spoiled sister. They assumed I would stay silent for the sake of family. They were wrong. When you are the architect who designed the castle, you are the only one who knows exactly where to pull the pin to bring it all crashing down. My name is Madeline Ashford, and until 7 o'clock this evening, I believed I was the architect of my own destiny. I believed that if you took a crumbling ruin, cleared away the rot, reinforced the foundation, and poured 5 years of your life into the soil, the harvest would belong to you. I was a fool. The drive to my parents' estate in Connecticut always felt like traveling back in time, but not in a nostalgic way. It was more like stepping into a museum where you were not allowed to touch the exhibits, even if you were related to the curators, beside me. Liam drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. He hated these dinners. He hated the way the air in the house seemed to be pressurized, designed to squeeze the oxygen out of anyone who did not share the Ashford bloodline. I reached over and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles were tense beneath his suit jacket. "It is just one night," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. We finalized the guest list, we confirmed the seating chart for the reception, and we leave. By this time next month, we will be married, and we will be standing in the glass pavilion at Rosecliff. Liam glanced at me, his eyes soft but guarded. He knew how much Rosecliff meant to me. He knew it was not just a venue, it was my redemption. It was the proof that I could take the family's failures and turn them into gold. We pulled into the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, a sound that always reminded me of grinding teeth. The house loomed ahead, a Georgian colonial monster that projected wealth and stability to the neighbors while hiding the emotional bankruptcy within. The windows were glowing with warm, amber light, a perfect picture of domestic bliss that I knew was entirely fabricated. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old floor wax. My mother, Eleanor, greeted us with air kisses that never quite made contact with skin. Terrified of smudging her makeup, or perhaps terrified of actual intimacy, my father, Robert, stood by the fireplace swirling a glass of scotch, looking like a man who had already rehearsed his lines for the evening. But it was my sister, Vanessa, who drew my attention. She was sitting in the high-backed velvet armchair in the drawing room, looking like a porcelain doll that had been placed on a high shelf to be admired but never played with. She was 26, 6 years my junior, and she had spent every one of those years perfecting the art of helplessness. Tonight, she wore a pale blue dress that draped loosely over her midsection, and her hand rested there, stroking the fabric in a rhythmic, possessive motion. She smiled when she saw me. It was not a smile of greeting. It was the smile of a cat that had just swallowed the canary and was waiting for you to notice the yellow feathers sticking out of its mouth. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20, but the 5 of us were clustered at one end, creating an intimate setting that felt entirely forced. The only sounds were the scrape of silver knives against porcelain plates and the delicate chime of crystal glasses. The silence was heavy, thick with things unsaid. I tried to make conversation about the weather, about the traffic coming out of the city, but my words died in the empty air. I decided to pivot to the reason we were here. "So," I said, placing my fork down and wiping the corners of my mouth with the linen napkin, "the final walkthrough for Rosecliff is scheduled for the 15th. The contractors finished the landscaping around the south garden yesterday. The roses are not in full bloom yet, but by the wedding day, they will be spectacular." I looked at my mother, expecting a nod of approval. She looked down at her plate, pushing a single pea around with her fork. "Madeline," my father said. His voice was deep, authoritative. The voice he used when closing a deal that he knew was unfair to the other party. "We need to discuss the wedding. That is what I am doing," I said, confused. "Everything is on track." The budget is tight, but since I covered the cost of the structural renovations myself, we are actually under the projected expenses by about 10%. Not your wedding, Vanessa piped up. Her voice was light, airy, and laced with venom. Mine, I blinked. I looked from Vanessa to my parents and back to Vanessa. Yours? You are not even engaged. Vanessa held up her left hand. A diamond the size of a quail egg sat on her finger. It was gaudy, excessive, and likely cost more than my first year's salary at Viridian Horizons. William proposed last night. Well, it was more of a mutual agreement between the families. But he did get on one knee, William, the son of Senator Sterling, a political dynasty in the making. Congratulations, Liam said, though his tone was flat. That is sudden. It has to be sudden, my father interrupted, taking a heavy swig of his scotch. The senator is gearing up for a re-election campaign. A wedding is the perfect media event to soften his image, family values, tradition. The press will eat it up, and he gestured vaguely toward Vanessa's stomach. There is a time constraint. My eyes dropped to Vanessa's hand, still rubbing her belly. You are pregnant. It is a blessing, my mother whispered. Finally looking up, her eyes were wet, but I could not tell if it was from joy or the strain of the performance. Okay, I said slowly, trying to process the information. So, you are getting married. That is great. Nessie, really, but why does this affect my walkthrough on the 15th? The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. He looked me dead in the eye, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame. But he crushed it instantly under the weight of his own ego. Madeline, we cannot have 2 weddings in one season. It is too much strain on the family resources and the social calendar. And frankly, the senator needs this wedding to happen next month, specifically on the 14th. November 14th, my wedding day. I felt a cold numbness spread from my chest to my fingertips. That is my date. Invitations have been sent. People have booked flights. We will reimburse them, my father said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. Liam, surely you understand. This is a matter of political urgency. We can push your wedding to the spring, or next summer. It will give you more time to save up. Save up? I repeated, my voice rising an octave. I do not need to save up. The venue is free. It is Rosecliff. I built it. Actually, Vanessa said, taking a sip of water and smiling over the rim of the glass. That is the other thing. We need Rosecliff. What do you mean? You need it. The senator wants a venue that screams old money but with modern amenities, Vanessa explained, as if discussing a shopping list. Rosecliff is perfect. The glass pavilion looks amazing in the photos you sent. It is exactly the aesthetic we are going for. So you want to borrow it, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. On my date. Don't borrow. Madeline, my father said. He placed his palms flat on the table. We are giving it to her. The room seemed to tilt. Excuse me? It is a dowry, my mother interjected quickly, her voice high and nervous. The Sterlings are a very prominent family. We need to match their contribution. They are bringing the political clout. We are bringing the real estate. We are transferring the deed to Rosecliff to Vanessa and William as a wedding gift. It will be their marital home and a private event space for the senator's fundraisers. I stared at them. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who claimed to love me, and I saw absolute strangers. You cannot do that, I said. My voice was dangerously calm. Rosecliff was a ruin. It was a tax burden you were desperate to unload 5 years ago. You told me that if I restored it, if I used my own money and my own design skills to bring it back to life, it would be mine. We had a deal. We had a conversation, my father corrected. There was never a formal contract. Madeline, the deed has always remained in my name. You were doing a project for the family. You are an architect. It is what you do. We assumed you were happy to contribute to the family legacy. Contribute? I laughed. A sharp, jagged sound. I spent $200,000 of my own savings on materials. I spent every weekend for 5 years supervising contractors. I laid the tiles in the foyer with my own hands because we could not afford a master mason at the time. I designed the drainage system that stopped the basement from flooding. That place is me. It is my work. And you did a wonderful job, my mother said soothingly, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled back as if she were burning me. Madeline, please try to understand. You have always been the strong one. You have your career at Viridian Horizons. You are successful. You have Liam. You can afford to buy another house or build another one. Vanessa is not like you. She needs this security. She needs this start in life to ensure she is taken care of. So because I worked hard, I get nothing? I asked. And because she got pregnant by a politician's son, she gets my life's work? Do not be crude, my father snapped. It is a business decision as much as a family one. The Ashford name will be linked to the Sterlings. It benefits us all. It benefits you, I corrected. It benefits Vanessa. It leaves me with a canceled wedding and a 5-year gap in my finances. We will write you a check for the materials, my father grunted, turning his attention back to his meal. Call it a consultation fee, but the property goes to Vanessa. The transfer papers are already drawn up. We sign them tomorrow. Liam stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You cannot just steal her property. We have records. We have emails. Madeline has acted as the owner for 5 years. Sit down, Liam, my father warned, not even looking up from his steak. This is a family matter, and unless you have a deed with her name on it, you have nothing. Liam opened his mouth to argue, his face flushing red with anger. He was a data analyst. He dealt in logic and facts. He could not comprehend the sheer, illogical malice of what was happening. He looked ready to flip the table. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was iron hard. Liam, I said softly. Don't. He looked down at me, confused. Madeline, we have to fight this. No, I said. I looked at my father, chewing his steak with the arrogance of a man who believes he is untouchable. I looked at my mother, refusing to meet my eyes, hiding her betrayal behind a mask of maternal concern. I looked at Vanessa, smirking, already imagining herself as the lady of the manor I had built. I realized then that this was not a negotiation. They had not invited me here to ask for my permission. They had invited me here to gloat. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to cry and beg so they could feel superior. So they could tell themselves that they were the benevolent parents dealing with a hysterical daughter. They wanted a reaction. I would not give them one. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the lilies and the rotting secrets of this house. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. I felt a strange clarity wash over me. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at a chaotic construction site and saw the underlying structure. They thought they held all the cards because they held the deed. They forgot that a building is more than just paper ownership. It is infrastructure. It is zoning. It is permits. And I knew where every single pipe was buried. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress. I did not throw my wine glass. I did not flip the table. I picked up my clutch bag. Madeline? My mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. She had expected an explosion. My silence terrified her more. I looked at her, then at my father, and finally at Vanessa. I let my gaze linger on my sister. Memorizing her triumphant expression, I wanted to remember it vividly when the time came. Fine, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any emotion, cold as the marble floors I had installed in the Rosecliff foyer. If that is the decision, then that is the decision. You agree? Vanessa asked, her smirk faltering slightly. I accept that you have made your choice, I said. I turned to Liam. Come on, we are leaving. But Madeline, my father started, perhaps sensing that this victory was too easy. Enjoy the gift, I said, cutting him off. I hope Rosecliff is everything you deserve. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. I did not look back. I walked out of the heavy oak doors and into the cool night air. Liam followed me, catching up as I reached the car. "Madeline, what the hell was that?" he hissed, unlocking the doors. "You just let them take it? That place is worth millions. It is your soul." I slid into the passenger seat and waited for him to get in. As he started the engine, I looked back at the house one last time. I saw the silhouette of my father in the window, watching us leave. "I did not let them take anything, Liam," I said quietly, watching the house disappear in the rearview mirror. "I just realized that I have been building on a rotten foundation, and sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to let the old structure collapse." "But the wedding," Liam said, his voice choked. "The venue." "Drive," I said, opening my phone and scrolling through my contacts until I found the number for the Viridian Horizons cloud server. "We are not going home to cry. We are going home to work." "Work?" "My father is right about one thing," I said, the ghost of a smile touching my lips. "He owns the land, but he does not know the first thing about what is underneath it." I looked at the date on my phone. We had 3 weeks before their stolen wedding. 3 weeks was a long time in the construction business. You could build a lot in 3 weeks, or you could tear it all down. The silence in our apartment was heavy, but it was a different kind of weight than the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' dining room. This was the silence of a bomb disposal unit after the red wire has been cut, and you are waiting to see if the timer actually stops. Liam placed a glass of water on the coaster in front of me. He did not offer me wine. He knew that when I was in crisis mode, I needed clarity, not sedation. I sat on our beige sofa, staring at the blank screen of the television. But what I was actually seeing was a reel of memories playing behind my eyes, vivid and painful. 5 years ago. Rosecliff was not a venue, it was a carcass. I remember the first day I walked the property with my father. The estate had been in the Ashford family for 3 generations. But like the family fortune, it had been neglected. The main house was suffering from dry rot, and the extensive gardens were a tangle of poison ivy and dead oaks. But the real disaster was the old carriage house and the surrounding grounds. "It is a teardown, Madeline," my father had said, kicking a piece of loose masonry with his Italian loafer. "We are thinking of selling the parcel to a developer. Maybe they can put up some condos." I had looked at the lay of the land, the way the sunlight hit the ridge even in the late afternoon, and the natural amphitheater created by the slope of the hill. I saw what he could not. I saw potential. "Do not sell it," I had told him. "Let me fix it. Give me the carriage house and the grounds. I will turn it into the premier event space in Connecticut. It will pay for itself in 3 years." I was 27. Hungry to prove myself, and naive enough to believe that a handshake with my father was more binding than a notarized contract with a stranger. We had shaken hands right there, over a patch of mud that would eventually become the Rose Garden. The deal was simple. I would provide the labor, the design, and the project management. They would provide the land. Once the business was profitable, we would split the revenue, and the property deed would eventually transfer to me as my inheritance. I never asked for that in writing. Why would I? You do not ask for a contract when you are donating a kidney to a sibling. You assume the gratitude is the contract. My mind drifted to the technical nightmare of those first 6 months. The beauty of Rosecliff today is built on an ugly, muddy reality that only I witnessed. The biggest issue was not the aesthetics, it was the water. The estate sat on a high water table. Every time it rained, the lower grounds turned into a swamp. I spent $40,000 of my own savings just on the hydrology study. I designed a complex subsurface drainage system, a network of perforated pipes and gravel trenches, French drains, that channeled the groundwater away from the building site and into a retention pond I disguised as a scenic lake. I spent weeks in muddy boots, arguing with excavation crews, checking the slope percentages to the millimeter, If that gradient was off by even 1%, the entire foundation of the future glass house would shift and crack within a year. No one sees the drains. They only see the dry, manicured lawns. But without my drains, Rosecliff is just a swamp with a fancy name. Then there was the glass pavilion. This was my pride. I did not want a tent. I wanted a cathedral of light. I used my connections at Viridian Horizons to source structural steel at cost. I designed a frameless glazing system where the glass panels were held in place by spider fittings, creating the illusion that the roof was floating. I chose low emissivity glass to regulate the temperature so that even in December, a bride could stand there in a sleeveless gown and feel nothing but warmth. I remembered the day the last pane of glass went in. I was standing on the scaffolding, exhausted, covered in dust, my bank account almost empty. But I felt a soaring sense of triumph. I had created something permanent. I had taken a piece of the earth and improved it. Now, sitting in my apartment, that memory felt like a physical blow. I had built a palace for a sister who had never lifted anything heavier than a credit card. Madeline, Liam's voice cut through the fog of my memory. He was sitting opposite me, his laptop open on the coffee table. The blue light from the screen reflected in his glasses. You are doing the thing where you stare into the middle distance and dissect the past. Stop it. I wasted 5 years, I whispered. I poured every spare dollar I had into that place. I missed vacations. I worked weekends. For what? That is the emotional question, Liam said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I am not interested in the emotional question right now. I am interested in the financial one. Something does not add up. I looked at him. What do you mean? Your father said they are transferring the deed to Vanessa and William as a dowry. He also said they need to match the Sterling family's contribution. That implies the asset, Rosecliff, has significant equity. It does, I said. Because I created it. The appraisal value skyrocketed after the pavilion was finished. Right, Liam said, turning the laptop around so I could see the screen. But usually, people transfer assets to avoid taxes or to leverage them. I just pulled the public property records for the county. They are public domain. You know, I leaned forward. The screen was filled with rows of data from the county clerk's office. Look at this entry from 3 years ago. Liam pointed to a line item. And this one from last year. I squinted at the numbers. My heart skipped a beat, then started hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 3 years ago, right after I had completed the expensive drainage system and the landscaping, my parents had taken out a second mortgage on the property. Last year, 2 weeks after I sent them the final rendering of the finished glass pavilion, they had refinanced the entire estate with a massive jumbo loan from a private equity lender. $2.5 million. I read the number aloud, feeling the bile rise in my throat. They cashed out $2.5 million. They stripped the equity, Liam said, his voice hard. They used your work, your improvements, to increase the appraisal value, and then they borrowed against it to the maximum limit. Madeline, they have been living off your labor for years. That new Porsche your father drives? Your mother's trips to Paris? That wasn't successful investing. That was them eating the house you built. I sat back, stunned. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was mathematical. They had not just stolen the venue for a wedding, they had already stolen the value of the venue to fund their facade of wealth. If they transferred the deed to Vanessa, they were likely transferring a debt-laden asset, or perhaps the sale to the hotel group was the only way to pay off this massive loan before the balloon payment came due. They are broke, I realized. Or close to it, that is why they are so desperate for the connection to Senator Sterling. They need a bailout. And they need the sale to the hotel group to go through after the wedding to cover their tracks, Liam added. If that sale fails, the bank forecloses. I felt a cold fury replace the sadness. They had looked me in the eye and told me I was helping the family, while they were essentially stripping the copper wire out of the walls of my life to sell for scrap. I pulled my own laptop out of my bag. I did not want to look at bank records. I wanted to look at blueprints. What are you doing? Liam asked. Checking the paperwork, I said. I logged into the secure cloud server of Viridian Horizons. I navigated through the folders. Project/private/Ashford_estate_renovation. I opened the folder labeled Permits Inspections. I knew the construction law in Connecticut better than I knew the Bible. Every structure requires a building permit. Every permit requires an architect of record, the licensed professional who takes legal responsibility for the design's safety and compliance. I opened the document for the glass pavilion. There it was, in black and white. Architect of record, Madeline Ashford, AIA. My eyes scanned down to the bottom of the file status. Status, /pending final inspection. I froze. Liam, I said, my voice trembling with a sudden, sharp intake of adrenaline. Do you remember the issue with the fire suppression system last month? Yeah. The inspector wanted a specific pressure valve changed? I changed it on the drawings, I said, clicking through the files. But I never called for the final reinspection because we were waiting for the imported chandelier to be installed. I wanted to do it all at once. I looked at the date. The permit was still active. It was still open. And most importantly, the certificate of occupancy, the CO, had never been issued. What does that mean? Liam asked, sensing the shift in my energy. It means, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face, that legally, the glass pavilion is not a building, it is a construction site. It is not cleared for public assembly. It is not cleared for habitation. And as the architect of record, I am the only person who can sign off on the request for the final inspection to get the certificate of occupancy. And if you do not sign off, then no one can legally step foot inside that building without hard hats and safety waivers. If they hold an event there, they are violating state building codes, fire codes, and insurance requirements if a single person trips and falls. The insurance company will deny the claim and the property owner is liable for millions. But your parents think it is finished, Liam said. They have keys. They have walked inside. They have physical access, I corrected. They do not have legal occupancy. They probably do not even know the difference. They think because the paint is dry, the building is done. They forgot that in my world. A building is just a pile of bricks until a piece of paper says it is a house. I stared at the screen. The document in front of me was not just a permit. It was a loaded gun. My parents had leveraged my work to borrow millions. They were planning to hand my creation to my sister to secure a political alliance. They were going to sell the land out from under me to a hotel chain, but they had made one critical error. They had treated me like a decorator, not an architect. A decorator picks curtains. An architect controls the structural integrity of the entire project. I looked at Liam. They want a wedding on the 14th? Yes. They can have a wedding, I said, closing my laptop with a snap. But they are going to have a very hard time holding it in a building that legally does not exist. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The despair was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating precision of a demolition expert deciding exactly where to place the charges. Tomorrow, I said. We go to see Julianne. I need to know exactly how much trouble I can cause without losing my license. And then, I am going to make a phone call to the Department of Buildings. I did not just have the high ground. I had the paperwork. And in America, paperwork is the only thing thicker than blood. Julianne Rossi's office was exactly like her legal strategy. High up, dangerously sharp, and devoid of any unnecessary clutter. She worked for one of the top boutique firms in Manhattan, specializing in high-stakes property disputes and intellectual property theft. She was also the only person I knew who could look at a weeping client and tell them to save the tears for the jury, because crying ruined the billable hours. Liam and I sat across from her glass desk. The view behind her was a panoramic sweep of the city skyline, a testament to the kind of power that built skyscrapers. But my mind was still stuck in the mud of Connecticut. I ran the preliminary search you asked for, Julianne said, sliding a thick file folder across the desk. Her nails were painted a deep, ox-blood red, tapping against the paper like a warning. "And Madeline, you are going to want to sit back for this. It is worse than we thought. Much worse." I did not touch the folder. "Worse than them stealing the venue? Worse than the mortgage fraud Liam found?" "The mortgage fraud is just the appetizer," Julianne said. "This is the main course. Liam found the loans, which was good work, but he was looking at debt. I decided to look at pending transactions. I have a contact at the Land Registry Office who flagged a pending title transfer request." She opened the file. Inside was a copy of a purchase agreement, heavy with legal jargon and stamped with a draft watermark. "Your parents are not just giving Rosecliff to Vanessa," Julianne stated, her voice flat and clinical. "They are selling it. The transfer to Vanessa and William is a temporary holding measure to minimize capital gains tax, exploiting a loophole for marital gifts. But the ultimate buyer is already lined up. The contract is dated for signing on November 20th. 6 days after the wedding, I felt the air leave my lungs. Selling it? To whom? "The Oakhaven Hospitality Group," Julianne said. "They are a massive conglomerate that buys historic estates and turns them into ultra-luxury boutique hotels. They have been trying to get a foothold in Connecticut for years." Liam leaned over to look at the document. "Look at the purchase price," he murmured, pointing to a figure on the third page. I looked. The number was written out in bold text. $22 million. My head spun. $22 million. That was not just a retirement fund. That was dynasty money. That was never work again and buy a private island money. "They are cashing out," I said, the realization settling over me like a shroud. The wedding, the rush, the demand for my specific designs, it all makes sense now. They are not just throwing a party for Vanessa, they are staging an open house. "Exactly," Julianne said, leaning back in her ergonomic chair. "Think about it from the buyer's perspective. Oakhaven wants a turnkey property. They want to see that the venue works. What better way to prove the value of the estate than to host the wedding of the year for a senator's son? The press coverage alone is worth millions in free marketing for the hotel group. Vanessa's wedding is essentially a glorified ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new owners. And I am the unpaid contractor who built the showroom," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and awe at the sheer audacity of it. "Correct," Julianne said. "If this sale goes through, your parents clear their debts, pay off the mortgages, and walk away with roughly $10 million in profit. Vanessa and William likely get a cut for lending their names to the stunt. And you? You get the satisfaction of knowing you increased the property value by about 400%. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the traffic crawling on the avenue below. I felt small. I felt used. For 5 years. I thought I was building a legacy for my family. I thought I was proving my worth to parents who had always overlooked me. But I was just a tool. I was a hammer they used to build a treasure chest they never intended to share. "They win," I whispered. "They actually win. If I sue them for the design rights, they will just settle out of court with a fraction of that sale money. They will still be rich. They will still have won." "Sit down, Madeline," Julianne commanded. It was not a suggestion. I turned back. Julianne was flipping to the back of the contract, to the dense pages of addendums and clauses that most people skimmed over. "I did not become a partner at 30 by letting people like your parents win," she said. I read the fine print of the Oakhaven agreement. These corporate contracts are standard, but they are very specific about liabilities. Oakhaven is buying the land, the structures, and the business potential. But there is a condition precedent clause here on page 42. She tapped the page. Clause 17, Section B. The seller guarantees free, clear, and unencumbered access to all major infrastructure and entry points associated with the operational capacity of the estate. Basically, they are promising the buyer that no one else has a claim on the land or the ability to block their business. "So?" Liam asked. "They own the land. Robert Ashford is the sole name on the deed." "He owns the main parcel," Julianne corrected. "He owns the big square that contains the house. the gardens, and the pavilion. But real estate in New England is messy. It is old. Property lines get drawn and redrawn over centuries. Sometimes, things get left out. She looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. Madeline, tell me about the driveway. The driveway? I blinked. It is a long asphalt road. It winds through the woods from the main county road up to the gates. It is about 1/4 of a mile long. And who owns it? My father does. It is part of the estate. Are you sure? Julianne asked. Because I pulled the tax maps from 1985, back when your grandmother, Beatrice Ashford, passed away. Your father inherited the estate, yes, but the will was contested, wasn't it? I racked my brain. I was only 7 years old when Grandma Beatrice died. I remembered her as a formidable woman who hated the smell of cigar smoke and thought my father was a pompous windbag, to use her exact words. There was a dispute, I recalled slowly. Grandma Beatrice wanted to leave everything to charity because she was mad at Dad for marrying my mother, but Dad fought it. Eventually, they settled. He got the house. He got the house, Julianne agreed. But Beatrice was a petty woman. I admire her. In her final codicil, the one that stood up in probate court, she carved out a sliver of land. She called it the carriage path. It was a separate tax lot, a tiny, useless strip of land that was too narrow to build a house on and too rocky to farm. Your father did not care about it because he got the mansion. He thought it was just a ditch. My heart started to thump against my ribs. I remembered something, a birthday, my 21st birthday. I got a letter, I said, the memory surfacing like a bubble from deep water. From the executor of her estate. It was years after she died. They said something about a transfer of title for a minor asset that had been held in trust until I came of age. I thought it was a savings bond or something. I signed the paper and sent it back. I never looked at it again. Julianne smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Liam, she said, open the county GIS map on the big screen. Liam connected his laptop to the wall monitor. He navigated to the county surveyor's website and typed in the address for Rosecliff. The map appeared, a patchwork quilt of property lines overlaid on a satellite image. Zoom in on the entrance, Julianne directed, right where the county road meets the private drive. Liam zoomed in. The main estate was a massive polygon labeled Ashford, Robert. But right at the neck of the bottle, right where the majestic iron gate stood, there was a thin, long rectangle that cut across the entrance like a scar. It was colored differently than the rest of the estate. Liam clicked on the thin rectangle. A pop-up window appeared with the ownership details. Parcel ID 04-B-49. Owner, Ashford. Madeline. Type, unimproved land/right-of-way. Dimensions, 200 meters by 12 meters. I stared at the screen. I did not just see a map. I saw the past 5 years of my life rearranging themselves. That is the choke point, I whispered. That is the only road in. To the left is a ravine. To the right is a dense forest protected by state wetlands conservation. The only way for a car, a truck, or a catering van to get to Rosecliff is to drive over that strip of land. Your grandmother left you the driveway, Julianne said, looking satisfied. Or at least, the most critical 200 meters of it. Your father probably forgot it existed, or he assumed that since you are his daughter, he has an implied easement, a right to use it, and for years, he has. You have never stopped him. You have never put up a fence. By allowing him to use it, you created a prescriptive easement in practice. So he has the right to use it? Liam asked, deflating slightly. Normally, yes, Julianne said, tapping her pen on the desk. If you try to block him now, he could go to court and argue that he has been using it openly for 20 years. So he has a permanent right to keep using it. That is how the law usually works. She paused, and the shark smile returned, sharper than before. However, she continued, we are not dealing with a normal neighbor dispute. We are dealing with a commercial sale. Remember the Oak Haven contract? They require unencumbered access. If you, the owner of the access road, decide to revoke your permission, your father can sue you for an easement. That lawsuit would take months, maybe years. No title insurance company in the world will insure the Oak Haven deal while there is active litigation over the only entrance to the property. I began to see the shape of the weapon Julianne was handing me. I do not have to win the lawsuit, I said, my mind racing. I just have to start one, or better yet, I have to create a physical situation that forces them to sue me. If there is a dispute on the day of the closing, Oak Haven walks away. The $22 million evaporates. Exactly, Julianne said. But we can go one step further. You are an architect. You know about safety regulations. If you were to decide that your property, this strip of road, was in need of urgent maintenance, if you needed to, say, repair the drainage culverts underneath the asphalt to prevent environmental damage, I would have the right to close the road for repairs, I finished for her. For safety reasons. As the owner, I would be liable if the road collapsed. So, I have a duty to maintain it. And if those repairs just happen to be scheduled for the week of November 14th? Julianne raised an eyebrow. I looked at the map again. That thin red rectangle was no longer just a piece of land. It was a noose around the neck of my parents' greed. They ignored it, I said softly. They ignored it because it was small. Just like they ignored me. They thought I was just the helpful daughter who liked to draw pictures. They never check the tax maps because they are so arrogant they assume they own everything they walk on. Arrogance is the best opposing counsel you can hope for, Julianne said. So, Madeline, what do you want to do? We can send a letter demanded payment for the easement. We can probably squeeze a few $100,000 out of them to let the sale go through. I thought about the money. A few $100,000 would be nice. It would pay for the apartment. It would pay for a nice vacation. Then I thought about Vanessa's smirk. I thought about my mother's fake tears. I thought about my father selling my 5 years of sweat and blood to a hotel chain so he could keep buying scotch and sports cars. I thought about them erasing me from my own creation. I do not want their money, I said. I want to kill the sale. I want Oak Haven to run for the hills. I want my parents to be stuck with a massive estate they cannot afford, a venue they cannot legally use, and a debt they cannot pay. Liam looked at me. He looked a little frightened, but mostly, he looked proud. So we are going for the throat? No, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. We are going for the road. Julianne, draw up the paperwork. I am officially reclaiming my property, and I think it is time for some major infrastructure upgrades. I am going to need a fence, a big concrete fence. I can have the cease and desist letters ready by tomorrow, Julianne said, already typing. But do not send them yet. The element of surprise is key. Let them spend the money on the catering. Let them hire the florists. Let them leverage themselves to the hilt. We wait, I agreed. We let them build the tower of cards as high as possible, and then I will pull out the bottom one. I walked out of Julianne's office with a lightness in my step that I had not felt since the dinner. I was no longer a victim of family drama. I was a property owner with a maintenance schedule. My parents had taught me that business was war. They just forgot that in war, you should never leave the supply lines unguarded, especially when the supply line belongs to the daughter you betrayed. The ringtone of my phone sliced through the quiet morning air of the office like a circular saw hitting a nail. It was my mother. I looked at the screen, watching the name Eleanor Ashford pulse against the background, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But a predator does not ignore the rustling in the bushes. She investigates it. I answered on the fourth ring, keeping my voice level and professional. Hello, Mother. Madeline, darling. Her voice was breathless, pitched a little too high, a sure sign that she wanted something. It was the same tone she used when she wanted to return a dress she had already worn to a party. I am so glad I caught you. We've had a tiny development with the wedding. A development? I asked, putting my phone on speaker and opening a fresh notebook. The wedding planner, she sighed, the sound dripping with performative exhaustion. She was completely incompetent. We had to let her go. She simply did not understand the Ashford vision, and now, with only 2 weeks left, we are in a bit of a bind. Vanessa is hysterical. You know how she gets. I knew exactly how Vanessa got. I also knew, thanks to a quick background check Liam had run on the local vendor forums, that the planner had not been let go. She had walked off the job after her second deposit check bounced. My parents were cash poor, leveraging everything on the hope of the Oakhaven sale, and they were stiffing the little guys in the meantime. That sounds stressful, I said, my voice smooth. It is, my mother agreed, and we were thinking well. You know the property better than anyone. You built it, and you have such a wonderful eye for detail. Would you come by? Just to consult? Vanessa really needs her big sister right now. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was banking on my desperate need for approval. The old Madeline who would jump through hoops for a crumb of affection. She did not know that Madeline was dead. I can come by this afternoon, I said. I can take a look at the logistics. Oh, thank you, darling. You are saving the day. Again. I hung up. I did not feel saved. I felt like a hunter who had just been invited into the lion's den, only to realize the lions were toothless and senile. When I pulled up to Rosecliff that afternoon, the place was a hive of chaotic activity. Delivery trucks were idling on the main lawn, tearing up the grass I had carefully seeded. A team of florists was arguing near the foyer, but the centerpiece of the madness was Vanessa, standing on the terrace of the glass pavilion, waving her arms at a bewildered contractor. My father was there too, looking red-faced and puffing on a cigar, the smoke drifting into the open doors of the pristine glass structure. "Madeline!" Vanessa squealed when she saw me. She did not hug me. She pointed at the lawn. Tell him I need the water feature." I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking with authority. What seems to be the problem? The contractor, a man named Henderson, whom I vaguely knew as a corner-cutting operator from the next town over, looked relieved to see a fellow professional. "Ms. Ashford, your sister wants to dig a pond, right there, next to the Pavilion Foundation. She wants swans." "A reflecting pool," Vanessa corrected, her eyes manic. "Like in The Great Gatsby, I want the swans to be floating behind us when we say our vows. It has to be romantic." "It is a wetland buffer zone," Henderson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "And the water table is high. If we dig there, we fill with mud. Plus, we need permits from the Environmental Protection Agency. That takes 6 months," my father grunted. "We do not have 6 months. We have 2 weeks. Just dig the hole, line it, and fill it with water. Who is going to know?" I looked at the ground. I knew exactly what was beneath that soil. The groundwater pressure there was immense. Digging a hole that close to the pavilion without proper shoring and drainage modification would destabilize the soil. It was reckless. It was illegal. It was perfect. I put on my best concerned but helpful face. I walked over to the spot Vanessa had pointed out. I tapped my chin, pretending to calculate. "Actually," I said, turning to Henderson, "if you do a shallow excavation, maybe 4 feet, and use a quick-set bentonite liner, you might get away with it. Visually, it would look deep enough for the photos. But the permit," Henderson started. "Dad is the owner," I said, smiling at my father. "If he authorizes the work and assumes liability for the timeline, it is his property. And honestly, Henderson, think of the portfolio pictures. A Swan Lake reflecting the glass pavilion? It would be your masterpiece." I saw the greed flicker in Henderson's eyes. He wanted the job. He wanted the money. "And what about the oaks?" Vanessa demanded, pointing to a cluster of 300-year-old white oaks that stood near the south entrance. "They block the view of the approach. I want the helicopter to land there. William and I are arriving by chopper." "A helicopter?" I asked. "Vanessa, those trees have been there since the Civil War. They are ugly and gnarled," she snapped. And the pilot said he needs a clear clearance zone. They have to go. My father looked hesitant. Those are heritage trees. Vanessa, the town has a strict ordinance against cutting trees with a trunk diameter over 20 inches. Daddy! Vanessa stomped her foot. Do you want the senator to think we are poor? Who arrives in a limo anymore? It has to be a helicopter. I stepped in. You know, I said thoughtfully, if you clear those trees, you not only get the landing zone, but you also open up the sightline to the valley. It would increase the visual grandeur of the estate for the Oakhaven appraisers. It makes the lot look bigger. My father's ears perked up at the mention of Oakhaven. It increases the value? Curb appeal, I lied smoothly. Open space screams luxury, and as for the town ordinance, well, if the trees were diseased or posed a safety hazard to the guests, you would have no choice but to remove them immediately. I could draft a consultant's note observing some rot. It was the bait. I was offering to validate their worst impulses. Do it, my father said, slapping Henderson on the back. Cut them down. Dig the pond. Madeline will handle the design specs. For the next 3 hours, I sat in the makeshift site office, drafting plans that were a regulatory nightmare. I sketched a pond that I knew would flood the basement if it rained hard enough. I marked the removal of protected trees. I designated a helicopter landing zone on unstable soil, but I was careful. When I printed the drawings, I stamped them clearly. Preliminary concept, for review only. Not for construction. I handed them to my father. Here are the designs. Now, normally, as the architect, I would need to file these with the town and wait for approval. But since you are in a rush, we will handle the execution, my father said, snatching the papers. We do not need the town sniffing around and delaying things. Henderson will just build off these sketches. Okay, I said, acting submissive. Just sign here, acknowledging that these are concept sketches and you are directing the contractor personally. It is just for my insurance. He signed without reading. He just wanted the pond. He just wanted the trees gone. He had just signed a document acknowledging that he was ordering construction that deviated from the approved site plan, absolving me of the liability for the work itself while creating a paper trail of his intent to violate the code. While Vanessa was busy screaming at a florist about the shade of cream in the roses, I sat down with my mother and father to discuss the Oakhaven deal. I reviewed the sale contract you showed me, I said, lying. I had seen it thanks to Julianne, but they did not know that. I noticed the handover date is set for November 20th. Yes, my mother said, sipping a glass of champagne. 6 days after the wedding, we are cutting it close. You know, I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Liam heard some rumors in the city. Oakhaven is looking at another property in the Berkshires. They are worried about cash flow. If you want to lock them in, you should offer a guarantee, an expedited handover. Expedited? My father asked. Promise them full, vacated possession within 48 hours of the wedding, I suggested. Offer a penalty clause. If you do not hand over the keys by noon on the 16th, you pay a penalty. It shows confidence. It shows you are motivated. It will make them stop looking at the other property. My father frowned. 48 hours? That is fast. We have to clean up the wedding mess. The cleaning crew can do that in a night, I assured him. Dad, this is $22 million. Do you want to lose it because you were too slow? Fear and greed are powerful motivators. 10 minutes later, I watched him call his lawyer and instruct him to add the expedited handover clause with a massive penalty for delay. He was locking himself into a timeline that I was about to make impossible. Meanwhile, in the city, Liam was playing his part. He was having lunch with a known gossip in the private equity world, a man who fed tips to the hard money lenders, the legal loan sharks who lent cash at exorbitant rates to desperate developers. Liam dropped hints that the Rosecliff valuation was conservative. He whispered that the Oakhaven deal was a done deal, practically signed in blood, and that the Ashford family was just looking for short-term bridge capital to make the event spectacular enough for a Vogue feature. By the time I left Rosecliff that evening, The trap was set from both sides. My father had secured a high-interest bridge loan of $500,000 from a predatory lender. Using the future sale proceeds as collateral, he immediately poured that money into the illegal pond, the tree removal, and a massive deposit for a helicopter rental. He was spending money he did not have on a venue he could not legally use for a sale that was never going to happen. I stood by my car as the sun began to set. The sound of chainsaws roared to life in the distance. The ancient oaks were coming down. It hurt my heart to hear it, like a physical wound. Those trees were beautiful, but they were a necessary sacrifice. Their stumps would be the tombstone of my parents' reputation. My mother walked out onto the porch, holding 2 glasses of crystal champagne. She waved me over. "Madeline," she called out, looking radiant in the golden light. "Come have a toast to the new Rosecliff." I walked back up the steps. I took the glass she offered. "To family," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "And to Vanessa's happiness. Thank you for being reasonable. Darling, I knew you would understand eventually. It is just better this way." "To the new Rosecliff," I repeated, lifting the glass to my lips. I watched her drink. I watched Vanessa laughing near the pavilion, pointing at where the excavator was already tearing into the earth, destroying the delicate drainage system I had installed 5 years ago. They were drunk on their own hubris. They thought I was the defeated daughter coming back to the fold. They did not see the architect inspecting the demolition site. I took a sip of the champagne. It was vintage Dom Pérignon. It tasted expensive. It tasted like victory. "Just enjoy it," I thought, watching the bubbles rise in the glass. "Drink up, because when the inspectors arrive, and when that fence goes up, this will be the most expensive drink you have ever had." I smiled at my mother. A genuine, warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the cage door has just clicked shut. "You are right, Mom," I said. "It is going to be a wedding no one will ever forget." The countdown to November 14th was no longer measured in days, but in decibels. The noise at Rosecliff was constant. It was the roar of heavy diesel engines, the beep of reversing delivery trucks, and the shouting of foremen trying to coordinate a logistics operation that rivaled a small military invasion. I sat in my car, parked just off the county road, watching a flatbed truck carrying a massive industrial generator negotiate the turn into the driveway. The driver had to swing wide, his tires crunching over the verge of the asphalt. The truck was heavy, likely 20 tons. I watched the suspension dip as it hit the section of the road that belonged to me. Every time a tire rolled over that 200-meter strip of land, my parents were committing trespass. Every time a commercial vehicle used it to deliver supplies for the wedding, they were engaging in unauthorized commercial use of a private residential easement. And every time the asphalt cracked under the weight, and it was cracking, they were damaging my property. I was not angry. I was documenting. I raised my phone and took a series of high-resolution photos, zooming in on the license plates and the visible stress fractures in the road surface. These photos were not for a scrapbook. They were exhibits A through Z for the file sitting on the passenger seat next to me. 2 weeks out. The timing had to be surgical. If I struck too early, they would have time to scramble and find a solution. Perhaps by bulldozing a new road through the woods, however illegal that might be. If I struck too late, the courts might grant them an emergency injunction out of pity for the bride. I needed to wait until the momentum of the event was so great that stopping it would be like trying to halt a freight train with a piece of paper. The crash would be inevitable. I put the car in gear and drove away from Rosecliff, heading toward the drab gray building that housed the Department of Public Works and Planning. The office smelled of stale coffee and photocopier toner. I took a ticket and waited for my number to be called. When I finally sat down across from a clerk named Brenda, I was the picture of a responsible, concerned property owner. "I need to file a notice of intent to enforce private property rights," I said, sliding a thick stack of documents across the counter. "And I need to file a request for an emergency road maintenance permit." Brenda adjusted her glasses and looked at the forms. "Address?" Parcel 04-B-49, I recited. It is a private access road adjacent to the Ashford estate. I am the sole owner. I have recently become aware that heavy commercial traffic is utilizing my private property without a commercial easement. The structural integrity of the culverts beneath the road is failing. I need to close the road for emergency repairs to prevent a collapse. Brenda flipped through the engineering report I had drafted myself. It was a masterpiece of technical truth. The culverts were old. They might fail under extreme load. The fact that they would likely hold up fine for a few more years was irrelevant. The report stated that immediate remediation is recommended to ensure public safety. You want to close the access? Brenda asked, looking up. Is there another way into the main estate behind it? That is not my concern, I said, my voice calm and legally precise. My concern is my liability. If a catering truck falls into a sinkhole on my land, I get sued. I have a duty of care to secure the hazard. I intend to erect a barrier and begin excavation on November 13th. Brenda stamped the document. Received. We will need to send an inspector to verify the hazard before we grant the full construction permit, she noted. Of course, I said. I am available any time, but I'm filing this notice to establish that the county has been warned of the danger. I walked out of the office with the stamped copy. That stamp was the detonator. My next stop was not a physical location, but a digital one. I sat in a coffee shop, connected to a VPN to mask my IP address, and navigated to the website of the State Department of Environmental Protection. I clicked on the link for report an environmental violation. I typed rapidly, my fingers flying across the keys. I did not sound like a vengeful daughter. I sounded like a concerned neighbor who knew too much about hydrology. Violation type: unauthorized dredging and filling of a Class A wetland. Location: the Rosecliff Estate. Details: property owners are currently excavating a decorative pond within 50 feet of a protected vernal pool. No silt fencing has been installed. Sediment runoff is visibly entering the groundwater system. Heavy machinery is operating within the root zones of protected heritage oaks. I attached the photos I had taken earlier that week. Photos of the mud, the lack of erosion control barriers, and the excavator digging deep into the water table. I hit submit. The Environmental Protection Agency takes wetlands very seriously. They do not care about weddings. They do not care about senators. They care about salamanders and water purity. Once that complaint was in the system, a field officer would be dispatched within 3 business days. A stop work order would be automatic. My phone buzzed. It was Julianne. The cease and desist is ready, she said. Her voice was sharp, professional. I have drafted it against your parents, the wedding planner, and the Oak Haven Hospitality Group. We are asserting that the design of the glass pavilion is your intellectual property. Since no contract was ever signed transferring the rights, and no payment was ever rendered for the design services, the structure itself is an unauthorized reproduction of your copyrighted work. It sounds ridiculous, I said, sipping my black coffee. Can we really copyright a building? We can copyright the architectural plans, Julianne corrected. And we can assert that using the building for a commercial purpose, the wedding and the subsequent sale, constitutes copyright infringement. We are demanding that they cease all commercial use of the structure until a licensing fee is negotiated. The fee, of course, being $5 million. They will never pay that. They are not supposed to, Julianne said. The point is the injunction. If Oak Haven sees a copyright lawsuit attached to the building they are about to buy, they will run. Corporate lawyers are allergic to litigation. Hold the letter, I said. Do not send it yet. Why? We are locked and loaded. Because the invitations just went out, I said. I want the RSVPs to come back first. I want the senator to book his travel. I want the trap to be full before we snap it shut. I drove back to Rosecliff in the late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the lawn. The house was manic. My mother was in the drawing room, surrounded by piles of cream-colored envelopes. These were the invitations, heavy cardstock, embossed with gold leaf, weighing about 4 ounces each. "Madeline!" she cried out, looking frazzled. "Thank goodness you are here. The caterer is asking about the electrical load for the warming ovens. Do we have 3-phase power in the pavilion?" "I will check the breaker panel." I lied. I knew we did. I had installed it. I walked over to the table and picked up an invitation. "Mr. and Mrs. Robert Ashford request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Vanessa." It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was a lie. "Have all of these gone out?" I asked. "The courier took the last batch this morning," my mother said, wiping her brow. "Everyone is coming. Madeline, the governor, 2 senators, the entire board of Oakhaven. This has to be perfect. It will be memorable," I said. My father walked in, looking gray. He was holding a stack of papers. "Madeline," he said, his voice tight. "We have a problem. The tent company for the cocktail hour. They are saying the fire marshal has not signed off on the occupancy permit for the lawn area yet. Something about emergency exits." He looked at me with a desperation that was almost pitiable. He was a man accustomed to buying his way out of trouble, but he was currently out of currency. "If we do not get that permit by Friday, they cannot set up the tent," he said. "And if there is no tent, and it rains—" "Dad, relax," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. I felt the tension in his muscles. He was vibrating with stress. "It is just bureaucratic red tape. The fire marshal is probably just backed up. I will go down to the office on Monday and smooth it over. I speak their language. I will get it sorted." "You can do that?" he asked, hope flaring in his eyes. "Of course," I said. "I am the architect. They trust me." "Oh, thank God," my mother exhaled. "I told you Madeline would handle it. Robert, she always handles the messy details." "You are a lifesaver," my father said. "I do not know what we would do without you." The irony was so thick I could taste it like metal on my tongue. They did not know what they would do without me. And soon, they were going to find out exactly what happens when me becomes the enemy. "I will take care of everything," I promised. "Just focus on the guests. Let me worry about the permits." I walked out to the terrace. The air was crisp, down by the pavilion. The excavator was silent for the night. The hole for the pond was gaping and muddy. A jagged wound in the earth. I could see the water starting to seep in at the bottom. Dark and murky. They had hit the water table, just as I knew they would. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Liam. The hard money lender just filed a lien against the property. "Your dad missed the first interest payment. He is completely tapped out." I looked back at my parents through the French doors. They were laughing now, pouring drinks, relieved that I had taken the burden off their shoulders. They were celebrating a rescue that was actually an execution. They were building a stage for a tragedy, and they thought it was a romance. I typed a reply to Liam. "Good. Let them bleed. The inspection is scheduled for Tuesday." I stood there for a moment longer, breathing in the cold air. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not the victim anymore. I was the architect. And an architect knows that sometimes, before you can build something true, you have to demolish the structures that are unsafe. The invitations were in the mail. The guests were booking their flights. The money was spent. The trap was not just set. The door was welded shut. 3 days, that was the countdown. 72 hours before Vanessa walked down an aisle paved with my stolen labor. The atmosphere at Rosecliff was frantic, vibrating with the kind of high-stakes anxiety that usually precedes a military invasion or a royal coronation. Florists were weaving garlands of white roses, lighting technicians were rigging chandeliers, and deep in the mud near the pavilion, the illegal pond was almost full, its surface shimmering deceptively under the autumn sun. I was in my office at Viridian Horizons, reviewing a legitimate project, when my phone exploded. It wasn't a ring. It was a sustained scream of notifications. 11 missed calls from my mother, 6 from my father, 3 from Vanessa. I let it ring one more time before answering. I needed to sound calm. I needed to sound like I was coming in from the cold, completely unaware of the firestorm I had ignited. "Hello? Madeline, get here, now!" My father's voice was unrecognizable. It was a guttural roar of panic. "They are shutting us down! The police are here! The EPA is here! Everyone is here!" "Who?" "Dad, slow down. Who is there?" "The inspectors. They have yellow tape. They are taping off the garden. They are saying we contaminated the wetlands. You have to fix this. You said you handled the permits." "I am on my way," I said, my pulse steady as a metronome. I drove to Rosecliff with the windows down, letting the cool air hit my face. When I arrived, the scene was chaos. It looked less like a wedding venue and more like a crime scene. 2 white SUVs with the state seal of the Department of Environmental Protection were parked on the lawn, their tires sinking into the pristine turf. A police cruiser was blocking the service entrance. A group of men in hard hats and high-visibility vests were standing near the excavation site of the pond. One of them, a stern-looking official with a clipboard, was shouting at Henderson, the contractor, who looked ready to faint. My parents were standing on the terrace, flanked by Vanessa, who was sobbing into a silk handkerchief. But what made my breath catch was the presence of the other guests. Mrs. Sterling, the senator's wife, and Vanessa's future mother-in-law, was standing near the fountain, watching the scene with eyes like ice picks. She was a woman who navigated Washington politics. She could smell a scandal from 3 states away. I grabbed my briefcase and ran toward the group, feigning shock. "What is happening?" I asked, breathless. "Officer? Inspector? What is going on?" The man with the clipboard turned to me. "Are you Madeline Ashford?" "I am," I said. "I am the architect. Inspector Davis, State EPA," he said, flashing a badge. "We received a credible report of illegal dredging in a Class A wetland buffer zone. Upon arrival, we found active excavation, discharge of sediment into the groundwater, and the unauthorized removal of protected oak trees. We are issuing an immediate stop work order. The site is now a suspended construction zone. No one enters that area." He pointed to the pond, Vanessa's dream-reflecting pool, which was now surrounded by bright yellow, "Caution, do not enter" tape. The tape cut right across the main aisle where the bride was supposed to walk. "This is a misunderstanding," my father shouted, his face purple. "We have a wedding in 3 days. You cannot tape off the garden." "I can tape off the whole property if I find you have compromised the aquifer." "Mr. Ashford," Davis snapped, "we also found evidence that the septic leach field was paved over to make a parking lot. That is a massive code violation." My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Madeline, tell him you filed the papers. Tell him it is legal." I looked at Inspector Davis. I looked at my parents, and then I looked at Henderson, who was looking at me with pleading eyes, hoping I would cover for him. I opened my briefcase. My hands were shaking, a perfect performance of anxiety. "I advised against the pond," I said, my voice small but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I told them it was a wetland. I have the emails." "What?" My father froze. "Madeline, what are you saying?" "I am sorry, Dad," I said, pulling out a file. "Inspector, here are the site plans I drew up originally. They show the protected zone. I explicitly marked this area as no build. My parents insisted on the water feature. I told them we needed a permit, but I looked down at my shoes. They said to just do it. They said they would handle the town." "You little—" My father started to lunge, but my mother held him back. "And the trees?" Davis asked, taking the file. "I recommended preservation," I said, pulling out the preliminary concept sketch I had made them sign. "See? I stamped this not for construction. I made them sign a waiver acknowledging that they were proceeding against professional advice." I handed the paper to Davis. He looked at the signature, Robert Ashford's signature, below the paragraph that explicitly stated he was ordering the work despite being informed of the regulatory risks. "This is very clear," Davis said, glaring at my father. "You knowingly violated the Wetlands Act. Mr. Ashford, you are looking at fines upwards of $50,000 a day, and you are going to have to pay for immediate remediation. That means filling this hole back in and replanting the buffer zone, starting now." "We cannot fill it in," Vanessa shrieked. "My wedding is in 3 days, the swans." "Forget the swans, young lady," Davis said. "If you do not remediate this, I am condemning the site." Mrs. Sterling stepped forward. Her suit was Chanel. Her demeanor was Teflon. She looked at the yellow tape, then at the weeping bride, and finally at my father. "Robert," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "you told the senator this property was turnkey. You told us the title was clean and the facilities were state-of-the-art. Why is the Environmental Protection Agency threatening to condemn the venue for my son's wedding?" "It is a minor hiccup, Margaret," my father stammered, sweating profusely. "Just a bureaucratic mix-up. We will pay the fine. We will fix it." "A minor hiccup?" Mrs. Sterling raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "They are talking about groundwater contamination. Do you know what the press will do with that? Senator's son weds at toxic dump? It is political suicide." She turned to me. "You are the architect. Is this safe? Is this legal?" I looked at Mrs. Sterling. This was the moment. I could lie and save them, or I could tell the truth and burn them. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a scalpel. "The structures I built 5 years ago, the main house renovation, the original gardens, are perfectly safe, but these new additions, the pond, the helicopter pad, were done without permits. And quite frankly, I am worried about the liability if the ground shifts during the ceremony because of the water table instability." I let the sentence hang in the air. "Liability," Mrs. Sterling repeated. She looked at the glass pavilion. "And that building? Is that permitted?" "The glass pavilion is structurally sound," I said. "But, well, the certificate of occupancy has not been issued yet. Technically, it is still a construction site." "What?" Mrs. Sterling's head snapped toward my father. "You are hosting 500 people in a building that does not have a certificate of occupancy? Are you insane? If there is a fire, the insurance is void. If someone trips, we are personally liable." "It is finished," my father yelled. "Look at it. It has glass. It has lights. It does not have the paper." "Robert," Mrs. Sterling snapped, "my husband is a lawmaker. We do not break the law, especially not for a party." She pulled out her phone. "I need to call the senator. We might have to move the reception to the hotel ballroom in the city. This is unacceptable." "No," Vanessa wailed, grabbing Mrs. Sterling's arm. "Not a ballroom. I want the estate. I want the photos." "Get a hold of yourself, Vanessa," Mrs. Sterling said, shaking her off. "You are embarrassing the family." My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Madeline," she hissed, "fix this. Tell them it is fine. Lie if you have to." "I cannot lie to a federal inspector." "Mom," I whispered back. "I could lose my license. I have a career. I am not going to jail because you wanted a pond." "We are family," she cried. "Then you should have listened to me when I told you not to dig," I said coldly. Inspector Davis was busy writing citations. "I am sealing off the south lawn," he announced, "and I am flagging the pavilion for inspection tomorrow morning. If I find one safety violation, I am padlocking the doors." My father looked like he was having a stroke. He had the fines. He had the remediation costs. He had a furious senator's wife, and he had a daughter who had just handed the authorities the smoking gun with his signature on it. "I thought you were helping us," he wheezed, staring at me. "I am helping," I said. "I am preventing you from getting arrested for gross negligence. You should thank me." I turned to leave, sensing that my work here was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in the Sterling family. The chaos had begun. As I walked back to my car, I heard Vanessa screaming at the landscapers to paint the mud green, if they had to. I heard my father pleading with Mrs. Sterling. I heard the frantic beep of the excavator backing up. I got into my car and closed the door. Sealing out the noise, my heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of the kill. 3 days left, and I hadn't even played my ace card yet. The road was still open, but not for long. I sent a text to Julianne. Phase 1 complete. The EPA is on site. The in-laws are spooked. Proceed with Phase 2. I looked in the rearview mirror as I drove away. The flashing lights of the police car reflected off the glass of the pavilion I had built. It looked beautiful, a beautiful shimmering disaster. The audacity of the Ashford family was something that defied the laws of physics. It was an infinite resource, renewable and inexhaustible. Despite the EPA raid, despite the yellow caution tape fluttering in the wind like the flags of a conquered nation, my parents had decided to proceed. They had simply moved the wedding ceremony 20 feet to the left, away from the illegal pond, and covered the muddy tracks of the excavator with expensive Persian rugs. They believed that if they just ignored the law hard enough, it would go away. They believed that money, even money they did not have, was the universal solvent. It was the morning of the rehearsal dinner, November 13th, the day before the main event. This was the day the lobster arrived. This was the day the sound system for the band was loaded in. This was the day the Sterling family was coming for the formal walkthrough and the dinner that was meant to cement the alliance between our houses. My parents were asleep in the manor, dreaming of political clout and a $22 million payout. I was awake. I was standing at the bottom of the driveway at 4 a.m, holding a thermos of black coffee and a clipboard. Beside me stood a foreman named Kowalski. I had hired him and his crew from a commercial paving company 3 towns over. I paid them double their usual rate for an emergency infrastructure repair job. Cash up front. They did not know my father. They did not care about weddings. They cared about the job order I had stamped by the Department of Public Works. "You want the Jersey barriers right across the width?" Kowalski asked, his breath steaming in the cold air. "It is gonna block everything, lady. A bicycle could not squeeze past." "That is the point. Mr. Kowalski," I said, sipping my coffee. "The culvert under this section of the road is critically unstable. We need to secure the site completely before we begin excavation. Safety first. You are the boss," he shrugged. At 4:30 a.m, the heavy machinery roared to life. It was a beautiful sound. A crane lifted the first concrete Jersey barrier, a massive slab of reinforced gray concrete weighing 4,000 pounds, and lowered it onto the asphalt with a dull, heavy thud, thud, the sound of finality, thud, the sound of a door slamming shut. By 5:15, the barricade was complete. A solid wall of concrete, 3 feet high and 20 feet wide, blocked the only entrance to the Rosecliff estate, behind the concrete. The crew erected a chain-link fence, topped with orange safety netting, and then, the pièce de résistance, I zip-tied a large metal sign to the fence. It was reflective, official, and legally binding. Private property, road closed for emergency maintenance, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. Owner, Madeline Ashford. I retreated to my car, parked on the public shoulder of the county road, and waited. The first victim arrived at 6:30. It was a refrigerated box truck from Le Petit Chef, the high-end catering company. The driver slowed down as he approached the turn. His blinker flashing, he turned the wheel, expecting to glide up the winding drive to the service entrance. Instead, he slammed on his brakes. He stared at the concrete wall. He honked his horn. I watched him get out, scratch his head, and walk up to the fence. He read the sign. He looked at his GPS. He looked back at the sign. He pulled out his phone. "Yeah, boss," I heard him say, his voice carrying in the quiet morning. "I can't get in. The road is closed. No, closed. There is a wall." By 7:30, the line of trucks stretched down the county road. The florist van, The rental company truck carrying the gold Chiavari chairs, the sound technicians, a chaotic snake of confused vendors, idling engines, and angry drivers, and then the phone calls started. My phone remained silent. I had blocked my parents' numbers the night before, but I could see the panic unfolding. I saw the caterer arguing with the florist. I saw the drivers looking at their watches. The lobster was on ice, but ice melts. At 8 o'clock, a golf cart came careening down the driveway from the house. It was my father. He was wearing a silk robe over his pajamas, his hair wild, his face a mask of purple rage. He was driving so fast I thought he would crash into the concrete barrier. He skidded to a stop on the other side of the fence. He jumped out, nearly tripping over his slippers. "What is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Who put this here? Move it! Move it immediately!" Kowalski, who was sitting on the barrier eating a donut, looked at him with mild disinterest. "Can't do that, pal. Road is closed. Unsafe conditions." "Unsafe?" my father shrieked. "I drove on it yesterday. It is fine. I have a wedding in 24 hours. Do you know who I am?" "Don't care," Kowalski said, chewing. "Talk to the owner." My father gripped the chain-link fence, shaking it. "I am the owner. I am Robert Ashford." "Not of this dirt." "You aren't." Kowalski pointed to the sign. "Says here, Madeline Ashford." My father froze. He looked at the sign, he saw my name, and then he saw me. I stepped out of my car. I was wearing my site visits gear, steel-toed boots, dark jeans, a hard hat, and a high-visibility vest over my cashmere sweater. I walked up to the fence, stopping just inches from where his fingers were white-knuckled against the wire. "Morning, Dad," I said. "You are violating the safety perimeter. You need to step back 5 feet." "Madeline!" He looked at me as if I were a demon that had crawled out of the earth. "Have you lost your mind? Tear this down. The caterers are outside. The food is going to spoil." "I cannot tear it down," I said, pulling the permit out of my vest pocket. I filed an emergency maintenance request with the county. The culvert beneath us, I stomped my boot on the asphalt, has structural fatigue. If a heavy truck drove over it, it could collapse. As the owner, I would be liable. I cannot in good conscience allow commercial traffic on a compromised road. "You are lying," he spat. "There is nothing wrong with this road." "Can you prove that?" I asked calmly. "Because I have an engineering report that says otherwise, and until I dig it up and replace the pipe, the road stays closed. Safety first, right? Just like you taught me." "I will call the police," he threatened, fumbling for his phone in his robe pocket. "I will have you arrested for domestic terrorism." "Call them," I said. "I will wait." He called them. In fact, he screamed at the 911 dispatcher that he was being held hostage. While we waited for the police, the scene grew more crowded. Vanessa arrived in the second golf cart, wrapped in a faux fur blanket. Her makeup smeared from crying. My mother was with her. "Madeline, please," my mother begged through the fence, switching tactics from anger to pity. "Vanessa is distraught. Look at her. How can you do this to your sister?" "I am not doing anything to her," I said. "I am maintaining my property. Maybe if you had checked the property lines before you sold the estate to Oakhaven, you would have realized you were selling a house with no driveway." "You know," my mother whispered, her face draining of color. "I know everything," I said. "I know about the 22 million. I know about the loans. I know you used my designs to get them. And I know you plan to cut me out completely." Vanessa stepped up to the fence. "I hate you," she hissed. "I have always hated you. You are jealous because I am getting everything you never could." "You are getting nothing." "Vanessa," I said softly, "you are getting a cancellation fee." The police arrived at 9:15, 2 cruisers, lights flashing, Officer Miller, a veteran cop who had dealt with enough rich people disputes to look thoroughly exhausted, stepped out. "All right, settle down," Miller said, walking up to the barrier. "We got a call about a hostage situation? Mr. Ashford?" She is blocking access, my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. She has barricaded my home. This is illegal imprisonment. Arrest her. Officer, I said, handing Miller my binder before my father could continue. I am the legal owner of this parcel, ID 04-B-49. Here is the deed. Here is the current survey. Here is the emergency repair permit issued by the Department of Public Works yesterday. And here is the liability insurance policy requiring me to secure the site. Miller put on his reading glasses. He looked at the deed. He looked at the survey. He looked at the permit. He looked at the concrete wall. Mr. Ashford, Miller said, looking up. According to these documents, this lady owns the driveway, from the county road up to that oak tree. But it is my house, my father sputtered. I have an easement. I have a right of way. Do you have a written easement agreement? Miller asked. It is implied. I have lived here for 30 years. That is a civil matter, sir, Miller said, handing me back the binder. If you want to argue prescriptive easement, you need a judge to grant an injunction. I cannot enforce a civil property dispute, but I can enforce a safety permit. She has a permit to close the road for repairs, if she says it is unsafe. And the county signed off on it. I cannot make her open it. You are useless, Vanessa screamed at the cop. Do something. Shoot the lock. Ma'am, step back, Miller warned, his hand drifting to his belt. Nobody is shooting anything. This is private property. Ms. Ashford has the right to fence her land. But how do we get the food in? My mother wailed. We have 300 guests coming tonight. Miller shrugged. I suggest you carry it. Walking is not prohibited, but no vehicles. I looked at the line of trucks. The catering truck was the size of a semi. There was no way they were carrying 500 pounds of ice and cases of champagne up a quarter-mile driveway by hand. And even if they did, the band equipment, the tables, the tent poles? Officer, I said, for safety reasons, I cannot allow foot traffic through the active construction zone either. The excavators are about to start. I signaled to Kowalski. He started the engine of the backhoe. It roared, spewing black smoke. See? I said. Dangerous. Miller looked at me. He saw exactly what I was doing. I saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He knew the Ashfords. He knew how they treated the town. She is right, Miller said to my father. Active construction site. You will have to use the woods. The woods? My father gasped. It is a ravine. It is a swamp. Then I guess you are stuck, Miller said. I am writing this up as a civil dispute. Have a nice day. The police got back in their cars and left. My father stood there, defeated. The silence that followed was broken only by the idling engines of the delivery trucks. Then, the final blow arrived. A sleek black limousine with diplomatic plates pulled up behind the catering truck. The driver honked, trying to clear the way, when the truck did not move. The rear door of the limo opened. Mrs. Sterling stepped out. She was wearing a pearl gray suit and holding a garment bag. She looked at the line of trucks. She looked at the concrete barrier. She looked at my father in his bathrobe and Vanessa in her blanket, standing in the dirt on the wrong side of the fence. I watched Mrs. Sterling's face. It went from confusion to realization to absolute, frigid horror. She walked up to the barrier, ignoring the mud splashing on her heels. Robert, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than my father's screaming ever could. What is this? Margaret, my father stammered. It is a misunderstanding. Madeline is having a tantrum. We will fix it. We will carry your bags up. A tantrum? Mrs. Sterling looked at the sign. Road closed. Emergency maintenance. She looked at the construction crew. She looked at me. I nodded to her. Good morning, Mrs. Sterling. I apologize for the inconvenience. As the property owner, I had to close the access road due to safety liabilities. I am sure you understand. We cannot have the senator's family driving on unsafe ground. She understood. She understood that we were legally blocked. She understood that the venue was inaccessible. She understood that her son was about to marry into a family that was not only broke, but was currently under siege by its own daughter. She turned to my father. "You told us everything was handled. You told us the EPA issue was a glitch. Now I find out you do not even own the driveway?" "Margaret, please," my mother cried. "The rehearsal dinner is canceled," Mrs. Sterling said. She did not scream. She just stated a fact. "And I am calling William. He is not coming. We are not having a wedding in a construction zone. Robert, we are not having a wedding where the bride's family is being barricaded by the police." "No!" Vanessa shrieked. She threw herself against the chain-link fence, her fingers clawing at the wire. "You cannot cancel. It is my day. Madeline, open the gate. Open it. I will kill you." I stood there, arms crossed, watching her. She looked like a trapped animal. The diamond on her finger flashed in the sunlight, a diamond bought on credit, for a marriage that was crumbling before it even began. Mrs. Lass Sterling got back into the limo. "Turn around," she told her driver. "Wait." My father ran along the fence line. "Margaret, we can fix this. I will sue her. I will get an injunction by noon." The limo performed a 3-point turn and drove away, disappearing down the county road. The catering driver leaned out of his window. "Hey, lady, I got perishable goods here. If I can't deliver in 10 minutes, I am turning around and billing you for the full amount plus a cancellation fee. It is in the contract." "Bill him," I said, pointing to my father. My father slumped against the concrete barrier, sliding down until he was sitting in the dirt. My mother was weeping, trying to hold Vanessa, who was screaming incoherent curses at the sky. I looked at Kowalski. "Okay, let's look busy. Dig a hole." "You got it, boss," Kowalski said. The backhoe bucket smashed into the asphalt of the driveway, ripping up a chunk of the road my father thought he owned. The sound of tearing pavement drowned out Vanessa's sobs. I took a photo, just one, Vanessa in the dust, the closed sign, and the back of the retreating limo. I sent it to Julianne. Caption: "Access denied." I turned and walked back to my car. I had a court hearing to prepare for. They would try to sue me, of course, but by the time a judge heard the case, the wedding date would be a memory, and the Oakhaven deal would be dead in the water. I did not feel happy. Happiness is warm. This felt cold. Like steel. It felt like justice. The standoff at the Jersey barrier had evolved from a construction site into a courtroom drama played out on a strip of cracked asphalt. It was noon. The sun was high and unforgiving, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look older and more desperate. My parents had managed to drag the key players back to the gate. They were desperate to salvage the $22 million deal that was slipping through their fingers like dry sand. On the safe side of the barrier, my side, stood a silver sedan containing Marcus Vance, the acquisitions director for the Oakhaven Hospitality Group. Next to him stood the Sterling family, Mrs. Sterling, her face like a thundercloud, her son William, looking nauseous, and their family attorney. On the siege side of the fence stood my parents and Vanessa. My father was no longer in his bathrobe. He had changed into a suit, but it looked disheveled, frantic. Vanessa was pacing like a caged tiger, her heels sinking into the dirt. I stood in the middle, leaning against the concrete barrier, arms crossed. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. "Mr. Vance, please," my father shouted through the chain-link fence, gripping the wire mesh. "This is a minor family squabble. Madeline is just acting out. We can have this removed in an hour. I have a crew coming." "You have no crew coming, Robert," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Because if anyone touches this barrier, I will have them arrested for trespassing on private property. And Mr. Vance, if you buy this land, you will be buying a castle with no drawbridge." Marcus Vance stepped forward. He was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way other people looked at their children. He did not care about emotions. He cared about liability. "Ms. Ashford," Vance said to me, ignoring my father, Your father claims the easement is implied. He says he has been using this road for 30 years. He has, I agreed. With my permission which I revoked this morning at 6 o'clock due to his negligence in maintaining the infrastructure, and since the sale contract you signed, the one with the expedited handover clause, requires unencumbered access by November 20th. I would say he is in breach of contract. You cannot buy a hotel that guests cannot drive to. We will sue her, my mother shrieked. We will get the easement. Litigation takes years, I said, looking directly at Vance. Does Oakhaven want to tie up $22 million in a property dispute that blocks the main entrance? And while we are in court, the road stays closed. No guests, no revenue, just legal fees. Vance grimaced. He looked at his watch. But that is not the only problem, is it? I continued. Turning to Mrs. Sterling. You are worried about the scandal of the EPA violation, but you should be worried about the fraud. Fraud? Mrs. Sterling's lawyer stepped up. Be specific, Ms. Ashford. I am talking about the glass pavilion, I said. The jewel of the estate. The reason Oakhaven wants to buy the property. The reason Vanessa wants her photos there. What about it? Vanessa snapped. It is beautiful. It is perfect. It is stolen, I said. At that moment, a sleek black Porsche pulled up behind the Sterling's limo. Julianne stepped out. She looked immaculate in a sharp navy suit, holding a leather briefcase. She walked up to the group, the gravel crunching under her stilettos. Julianne Rossi, she announced, handing a thick stack of papers to my father through the fence, and another copy to Mr. Vance. I represent Madeline Ashford. These are court-certified copies of a copyright infringement lawsuit filed this morning in the Federal District Court. Copyright? My father looked at the papers, his hands shaking. You cannot copyright a building. We can copyright the architectural plans, Julianne said smoothly. Madeline Ashford is the sole creator of the design for the glass pavilion. She never transferred the rights to you. She was never paid for her services. And yet, you used her designs to secure a $2.5 million mortgage. And now you are attempting to sell her intellectual property to a third party for profit. We have also filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, Julianne added, turning to Vance. We are asking the court to freeze the asset until the licensing fee of $5 million is paid to my client. The glass pavilion cannot be used for commercial purposes. That means no weddings, and certainly no hotel operations. Vance flipped through the lawsuit. His face went pale. Mr. Ashford, did you disclose that the architectural rights were not part of the deed transfer? I paid for the materials, my father stammered. It is on my land. The land is yours, I said. The art is mine, and just like you cannot sell a painting just because you own the gallery it hangs in, you cannot sell my building, not without my signature, and you are not getting it. This is blackmail, Vanessa screamed. You are ruining my life because you are a jealous, lonely spinster. I am not jealous. Vanessa, I said, looking her in the eye. I am just professional. And professionally speaking, your wedding venue is a crime scene. I turned to the Sterlings. William was looking at his shoes. Mrs. Sterling looked like she had swallowed a lemon. There is one more thing, I said. The bank fraud. My mother gasped. Madeline, stop. Please. You used my unapproved, unpermitted drawings to get that jumbo loan, I said, my voice relentless. You forged my signature on the valuation documents. I saw the file, Dad. You signed Madeline Ashford on the collateral assessment. That is a felony. And when the bank finds out that the collateral, the pavilion, is legally contested and has no certificate of occupancy, they will call the loan immediately. I looked at Mrs. Sterling. Your son is about to marry into a family that is not just bankrupt. They are facing federal charges for bank fraud, environmental violations, and intellectual property theft. The Oakhaven sale is dead. The money is gone. If this wedding happens, William is not marrying an heiress. He is marrying a subpoena. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Marcus Vance closed the folder. He looked at my father with pure disgust. Oakhaven is withdrawing its offer, Vance said. We are invoking the fraud clause in the preliminary agreement, and we will be suing for the return of our deposit, plus damages for bad faith negotiation. Expect to hear from our legal team by Monday. No, my father wailed. Marcus, wait. We can work this out. There is nothing to work out, Vance said, walking back to his car. You do not own the access road. You do not own the building rights. You sold us a phantom. He got in his car and drove away. Mrs. Sterling watched him go. Then she turned to her son. William, she said sharply, get in the car. But Mother, William started, looking at Vanessa through the fence. Vanessa was sobbing, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. I said get in the car, Mrs. Sterling commanded. There will be no wedding. We are issuing a statement that the ceremony is postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen circumstances. We are not attaching our name to a fraud investigation. She looked at my parents. Do not contact us. Do not contact William. If you try to speak to the press, we will release the details of the EPA violation and the forged loan documents. We will bury you. William, Vanessa shrieked, reaching through the fence. Do not leave me. I love you. Think of the baby. William looked at her. For a second, I saw pity in his eyes, but then he looked at the concrete barrier, the police tape, and the ruin of the Ashford reputation. Self-preservation won. I am sorry, Nessie, he whispered. He got into the limo. The door slammed shut. The Sterling family drove away, following the Oakhaven representative down the road. I was left alone with them. The barrier stood between us, a gray monument to the truth. My father looked at the retreating cars, then at me. The fight drained out of him. He looked old. He looked broken. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man who knew he was about to lose everything. Madeline, he croaked. Madeline, please. You have made your point. You won. Now take down the barrier. We can refinance. We can find another buyer. But we need the road. There is no other buyer. Dad, I said. No one is going to buy a property with this much legal baggage. The bank is going to foreclose. It is over. How can you do this? My mother wept, clinging to the fence. We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me nothing, I said, my voice devoid of anger, just cold, hard fact. You gave me a bill. You made me pay for my own existence. You used my talent to fund your lifestyle, and when you were done with me, you tried to throw me away like a used napkin. You didn't raise a daughter. You raised an asset, and now the asset is liquidating itself. I will give you a cut, my father begged. I will give you half. Just open the road. If the bank takes it, we lose the house. We lose everything. We will be on the street. You should have thought of that before you stole my venue, I said. Vanessa had slid down to the ground. She was not faking it this time. She was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth in the dirt. Her fairy tale was dead. Her prince had run away. Her castle was a foreclosure. Madeline, my father pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Please, just tell us what you want. We will do anything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single white card. It was Julianne's business card. I walked up to the fence and tucked it into the chain-link mesh, just out of his reach. I do not want anything from you, I said. I am done negotiating. If you have anything to say, you can say it to Julianne. She handles all my charity cases now. Charity? My mother gasped. Yes, I said, because that is what you are now. You are not the owners of Rosecliff. You are squatters in a bank-owned property, and I am the neighbor who just built a very nice, very permanent fence. I turned my back on them. Madeline, my father screamed, his voice breaking. Madeline, come back. You cannot leave us like this. I kept walking. I walked past the concrete barrier, past the private property sign, past Julianne, who was leaning against her Porsche with a satisfied smirk. Did they sign? Julianne asked. They did not have to, I said, opening the car door. The look on their faces was a signature enough. I got in the car. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. My parents were still clinging to the fence, shouting at the empty road. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They wanted a wedding that would make history. I gave them one. It was the day the Ashford Empire fell. Not with a bang, but with the slam of a car door. The air in Superior Courtroom 4B smelled of lemon floor polish and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, windowless box where dreams went to die, usually buried under mountains of paperwork. For 3 months, my parents had tried to bury me. They had thrown every legal stone they could find, hoping one would strike me down before the truth came out. They sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like ghosts of the people they used to be. My father, Robert, had lost 20 pounds. His suit, once tailored to perfection, hung loosely on his frame. My mother, Eleanor, wore dark glasses, presumably to hide the dark circles that no amount of expensive concealer could cover. Vanessa was not there. She had fled to a cousin's house in Florida the moment the Oakhaven deal collapsed, unable to face the humiliation of a canceled wedding and a bankrupt family. I sat at the defense table next to Julianne. We did not look tired. We looked prepared. In front of us sat 3 bankers' boxes, organized with the precision of a structural blueprint. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Holloway entered. He was a stern man with a reputation for hating time-wasters. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and looked at the 2 tables. "We are here for the matter of Ashford versus Ashford," he said, his voice dry. The plaintiffs are alleging tortious interference with business relations, creating a public nuisance, and malicious intent causing financial distress. The defendant has countersued for copyright infringement, fraud, unjust enrichment, and identity theft. Let us proceed. My parents' lawyer, a man named Mr. Thorne, who charged by the minute and looked like he knew he was fighting a losing battle, stood up. "Your Honor," Thorne began, trying to inject passion into a hopeless narrative. "The facts are simple. My clients, Robert and Eleanor Ashford, were days away from closing a life-changing real estate transaction, a sale valued at $22 million. Their daughter, the defendant, acted out of pure spite. She erected a concrete barrier across the only access road to the estate, physically preventing the buyers from entering. Her actions were not maintenance. They were sabotage. She weaponized a minor property dispute to destroy her parents' livelihood." I watched my father nod vigorously. He still believed his own lies. He believed that because he needed the money, he was entitled to it. Then it was Julianne's turn. She stood up, buttoning her blazer. She did not raise her voice. She did not pace. She simply laid a single document on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Julianne said, "the plaintiffs claim my client interfered with their business, but one cannot interfere with a business that is built on stolen property. The Oakhaven deal was fraudulent from its inception because the plaintiffs were attempting to sell an asset they did not own." "Objection!" Thorne shouted. "The deed is in Robert Ashford's name. The land is," Julianne countered smoothly. "The intellectual property is not. Exhibit A, the architectural blueprints for the glass pavilion. Dated 5 years ago, stamped and signed by Madeline Ashford. No contract exists transferring these rights to the plaintiffs. No payment was ever made. Under federal copyright law, the structure is an unauthorized derivative work. My client has the right to block access to it, fence it off, or tear it down if she sees fit." Judge Holloway looked at the blueprints. Then he looked at my father. "Mr. Ashford, did you pay your daughter for these designs?" My father stood up, his hands gripping the railing of the witness box. "It was a family project. She did it for the wedding. It was a gift." "A gift is a transfer of ownership without expectation of payment," Julianne said. "But here we have Exhibit B." She pulled out a printed email thread from 5 years ago. This is an email from Madeline to Robert Ashford, dated shortly after construction began. Julianne read, "Dad, just to confirm, once the venue is profitable, we will formalize the partnership agreement and my equity share as discussed. And here's your reply. Mr. Ashford. Don't worry, honey. We will take care of the paperwork when the time is right. You are investing in your future inheritance." Julianne looked at the jury box. Although this was a bench trial, he acknowledged the investment. He acknowledged the future equity. He lured her into 5 years of unpaid labor with a promise of partnership, then attempted to sell the result of that labor and keep 100% of the profit. That is not a gift, Your Honor. That is theft of services and unjust enrichment. My father's face turned a mottled shade of red. She is my daughter. I put a roof over her head. And she put a roof over your venue, Julianne shot back. A glass one, which brings us to the most serious matter. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The reason I had stayed silent when they accused me of being a jealous sister. I had been saving the bullet for the final act. Your Honor, Julianne said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. While reviewing the financial records of the Rosecliff estate during discovery, we found a loan document from the First National Bank of Connecticut, a jumbo mortgage taken out 18 months ago for $2.5 million. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. My father froze. The collateral for this loan, Julianne continued, was the improved valuation of the estate, specifically citing the completion of the glass pavilion. The bank required the signature of the architect of record to verify the valuation and the completion status. Julianne held up a document. It was blown up on a poster board for the whole room to see. At the bottom, next to the signature of Robert Ashford, was a signature that read, Madeline Ashford. Ms. Ashford, Julianne asked me, "Is that your signature?" I stood up. No, it is not. Did you authorize anyone to sign for you? No. I did not. Your Honor, Julianne said, turning to the judge. We have a sworn affidavit from a forensic handwriting analyst confirming that the signature of Madeline Ashford on this federally insured loan document was forged, and the analyst confirms that the pen pressure and stroke style match the handwriting of Robert Ashford. The courtroom went dead silent. This was no longer a civil dispute about a driveway. This was bank fraud. This was a felony. Mr. Thorne, my parents' lawyer, looked at the document, then at his client. He closed his briefcase. He knew it was over. He was probably already calculating how to withdraw from the case to avoid being disbarred by association. Judge Holloway stared at my father. The look of annoyance was gone, replaced by the cold, hard glare of the law. Mr. Ashford, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, did you forge your daughter's signature to secure a multi-million-dollar loan? My father stammered, sweat pouring down his face. She was busy. I just intended to tell her. It was for the family. We needed the liquidity. So you admit to signing it? The judge pressed. I had to, my father shouted, cracking under the pressure. The bills were piling up. The construction cost more than we thought. I needed the money to keep the lights on. I was going to pay it back when we sold to Oakhaven. It was a bridge loan. No one was supposed to get hurt. Except the bank, the judge said, and your daughter, and the buyers you were trying to defraud. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. I have heard enough, the judge declared. I am dismissing the plaintiff's claims for tortious interference. Ms. Ashford had every legal right to secure her property and restrict access to a construction site that she owned. The plaintiff's argument that they were entitled to an easement is denied. Given their bad faith actions and failure to maintain the infrastructure, he turned a page in his notebook. Regarding the countersuit, the judge continued, I am ruling in favor of the defendant, Madeline Ashford. I find the plaintiffs liable for copyright infringement. I find them liable for unjust enrichment for 5 years of uncompensated labor. I am awarding the defendant damages in the amount of $3.5 million, representing the fair market value of her design work and project management, plus punitive damages for the malicious nature of the fraud. My mother sobbed aloud, burying her face in her hands. $3.5 million. They did not have 3.5 million cents. Furthermore, Judge Holloway said, looking over his glasses at my father, I am referring the matter of the forged loan documents and the potential environmental violations to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Mr. Ashford, I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney immediately. This court is adjourned. The gavel banged again. It was the sound of an empire crumbling. 2 bailiffs moved toward my father, not to arrest him yet, but to ensure he didn't run. He slumped in his chair, a broken man. He looked at me across the aisle. His eyes were pleading, begging for a mercy I did not possess. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The victory was absolute, but the fallout was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the reality of the judgment set in. My parents were ruined. The judgment for $3.5 million was just the start. Oakhaven sued for the return of their deposit and legal fees. The bank, alerted to the fraud, called the $2.5 million loan immediately. The EPA levied fines of $50,000 a day for the wetlands violation. My parents had over $10 million in immediate debt and 0 liquid assets. To avoid immediate jail time for my father, his lawyer argued that he needed to be free to liquidate assets to pay restitution. They had to sell everything. The cars were repossessed. The art was auctioned off. Vanessa's engagement ring was returned to the jeweler for a fraction of its cost. But the only asset that mattered, the only thing that could possibly cover the mountain of debt, was Rosecliff itself. The bank seized the property. They initiated a foreclosure sale, desperate to recoup their losses. They listed the estate for $15 million, a steep drop from the $22 million Oakhaven had offered, but still enough to pay off the creditors. Real estate agents swarmed. It was still a magnificent property. The house was grand. The glass pavilion, my pavilion, was an architectural marvel. But there was a catch, a 200-meter catch. I was sitting in my new office. I had used a small portion of the settlement money I would likely never see to start my own firm, when my phone rang. It was the listing agent for the bank, a woman named Sarah with a voice like sandpaper. Ms. Ashford, she said briskly, I am handling the foreclosure sale of the Rosecliff estate. We have a potential buyer, a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley. He loves the privacy. He is ready to make a cash offer. Good for him, I said, spinning my pen. There is just one due diligence item, Sarah said. The title search shows that the main access road is owned by you. The previous temporary easement has been revoked by court order. The buyer needs you to sign a permanent easement agreement granting right-of-way. Obviously, the bank is willing to offer you a standard fee. Say $50,000? I laughed. It was a genuine, dark laugh. Ms. Ashford? Sarah, I said, you seem to be under a misunderstanding. I am not selling the easement. Excuse me? I am not granting access, I repeated clearly. To anyone, not for $50,000, not for $500,000. But Ms. Ashford, Sarah stammered, without the easement. The property is landlocked. The only other access is through a protected state wetland ravine. You cannot build a road there if you do not grant access. No one can get to the house. I know, I said. I designed the site plan. I know exactly how trapped it is. But why? Sarah sounded desperate. If we cannot sell the house, your parents cannot pay the restitution. If they do not pay, your father goes to prison for a very long time, and you will never get your $3 million judgment. I do not care about the money, I said. And as for my father, well, actions have consequences. You are making the property worthless, she cried. It is a $15 million estate. It is a $15 million estate if you can drive to it, I corrected. Right now, It is just a very expensive pile of bricks in the middle of the woods. It is a helicopter-only property, and since the EPA banned the helipad, I guess it is a hiking destination. You are vindictive, she spat. I am the owner, I said, and my property is closed. Permanently. I hung up. The news spread quickly. The tech billionaire pulled his offer. The next buyer, a hedge fund manager, walked away as soon as his lawyer saw the no access clause. The listing price dropped. 12 million, 10 million, 8 million. 6 months passed. The weeds began to grow through the cracks in the tennis court. The paint on the shutters began to peel. The glass pavilion, unheated and unmaintained, started to look like a ghost ship. Rosecliff sat on the market, a rotting jewel box that no one could open. My parents were evicted. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a working-class neighborhood on the other side of the state. My father took a job as a greeter at a department store to pay for his legal defense. My mother started selling her old designer clothes on eBay. They called me sometimes, late at night. I never answered. I drove by Rosecliff one last time before winter set in. I stopped my car at the Jersey barrier. The concrete was stained with rain, and the private property sign was slightly crooked. I looked through the chain-link fence. The driveway was covered in fallen leaves. The house loomed in the distance, dark and silent. It was a monument to greed, and I was the keeper of the keys. I had built it, and I had destroyed it. And as I stood there in the cold wind, I realized that I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt clean. The rot was gone. The foundation was clear. It was time to build something new. But this time, I would build it on my own land, with my own name on the deed, and I would be the only one holding the gate pass. The foreclosure auction took place on a rainy Tuesday morning on the steps of the county courthouse. It was a bleak affair, devoid of the glamour my parents had spent their lives chasing. There were no champagne toasts, no paparazzi, and certainly no helicopters. There was just a clerk with a microphone, a wet clipboard, and a handful of vultures, investors looking for a carcass to pick clean. I stood at the back of the crowd under a large black umbrella. Liam standing silently beside me. We were not there to watch the execution. We were there to sign the death certificate. The opening bid was set at $8 million. The auctioneer looked around the huddle of investors, expecting a flurry of raised hands. Rosecliff, after all, was a legendary estate. But the hands stayed in pockets. The investors whispered to one another, shaking their heads. They all knew the score. They knew about the Jersey barrier. They knew about the hostile owner of the access road, who had publicly vowed never to grant an easement to a commercial entity. 7 million, the auctioneer called out, his voice fighting against the sound of the rain. Do I hear 7 million? Silence. 5 million? A man in a trench coat stepped forward, looked at me, saw the cold resolve in my eyes, and stepped back. He knew that buying the house without the road was like buying a car without an engine. The price plummeted. The bank was desperate. They were holding a toxic asset that was costing them thousands of dollars a month in property taxes and maintenance, and they knew that as long as I held the deed to the driveway, the property was effectively worthless on the open market. 1 million, the auctioneer said, sounding defeated. $1 million for the Rosecliff estate. I stepped forward. I lowered my umbrella just enough for him to see my face. 1.2 million, I said clearly. The auctioneer looked at me. He looked at the bank representative, who gave a curt, resigned nod. They just wanted it off their books. Going once, the auctioneer droned. Going twice, sold to the lady in the black coat. It was anticlimactic. I wrote a check for the deposit from the settlement money I had received, money that had come from the liquidation of my parents' other assets, in a twist of irony that would have made a Greek tragedian blush. I had used the money my parents were forced to pay me to buy their beloved kingdom for pennies on the dollar. A week later, Liam and I unlocked the front doors of the manor. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and abandoned ambition. The furniture was gone, sold off to pay creditors. The walls were marked with the pale rectangles where expensive art had once hung. It was a shell. We walked through the silent halls. our footsteps echoing on the marble floors. We walked out to the terrace and looked down at the glass pavilion. It was still standing, majestic and ethereal, though the glass was streaked with grime and the landscaping was overgrown with weeds. The yellow caution tape from the EPA was gone, replaced by the wild reclamation of nature. "So," Liam said, putting his arm around my waist, "we own it, all of it, the house, the pavilion, the land. Do you want to live here?" I looked at the house where I had grown up, the house where I had been made to feel small, the house that was supposed to be my sister's dowry. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel a sense of conquering, but I felt nothing. It was just wood and stone, and it was cold. "No," I said, turning my back on the mansion. "This place is poisoned. Every room has a memory of a lie. If we live here, we will just be the ghosts haunting the next generation." "Then what do we do with it?" Liam asked. "Flip it?" "No," I said. "We give it back." I contacted the Connecticut Land Conservation Trust the next day. They had been trying to acquire the woodlands surrounding Rosecliff for decades to create a protected greenbelt. But my father had always fought them, hating the idea of public hikers near his estate. I made them an offer they could not refuse. I would sell them the entire estate, the house, the pavilion, the grounds, and yes, the driveway, for exactly what I paid for it, $1.2 million. There was only one condition: the house would be demolished. The invasive ornamental gardens would be rewilded. The glass pavilion would be repurposed as a botanical education center open to the public, and the park would be named Ashford Park. My parents wanted the Ashford name to be associated with exclusivity and wealth. I decided it would be associated with public service and open access. Anyone could walk here. Anyone could enjoy the view. It was the ultimate democratization of their elitist dream. The demolition began a month later. I did not watch the wrecking ball hit the main house. I did not need to see it fall. I knew that the foundation was rotten, and that was enough. While the walls of Rosecliff were coming down, the walls of my parents' new reality were closing in. They had moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a converted industrial block in Bridgeport. It was a loud, cramped neighborhood, far from the country clubs and manicured lawns of their past. The rent was high, and their credit score was non-existent. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from Julianne, who kept tabs on them for legal reasons, that my father had found work. He was a greeter at a discount department store. The man who used to scream at waiters if his scotch was the wrong vintage was now standing on tired legs for 8 hours a day, forced to smile at strangers and check their receipts. It was a humiliation so total that it felt almost biblical. My mother, who had never worked a day in her life, was trying to sell her remaining designer handbags on eBay, but she was struggling to understand the shipping fees and the platform's policies. She spent her days in the small, dim living room, surrounded by boxes of unsold clothes, drinking cheap wine and complaining to anyone who would listen about how she had been swindled by her ungrateful daughter, and Vanessa. Vanessa had taken the fall the hardest. She had lost the fiancé, the status, and the future she believed was her birthright. She was living on the couch in my parents' apartment, with no skills, no degree, and a reputation that was radioactive in high society, thanks to the Sterling family's PR team. She had turned to the only economy that would have her. She became an online influencer for sketchy products. I saw one of her videos once, sent to me by a friend. She was sitting in a poorly lit corner of the apartment, wearing too much makeup, trying to sell diet tea and knockoff jewelry to a handful of viewers. She looked desperate. She looked hollow. She kept referencing her estate and her upcoming projects, clinging to a delusion that everyone else could see through. They tried to call me. At first, it was every day. Voicemails that swung wildly from screaming rage to weeping apologies. My father left a message saying he was sick, that he needed money for medicine. My mother left messages saying they were starving. I knew they were lying. I knew they had a small pension that was protected from the bankruptcy. They were not starving. They were just no longer rich. They were experiencing the life of the average person, and to them, that felt like torture. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked Vanessa's social media accounts. I did not want them to suffer, but I refused to be their audience. I refused to be their resource. I had severed the limb to save the body, and I was not going to stitch it back on. 6 months after the demolition, Liam and I boarded a plane. We did not go to a grand hotel. We did not hire a helicopter. We flew economy class to Athens, and then took a ferry to a small, quiet island in the Cyclades. The air in Naxos was different. It smelled of salt and thyme and sun-baked earth. It was clean. We rented a small villa on a hill overlooking the Aegean Sea. It was simple: white walls, blue shutters, a terrace with a wooden table. On the morning of our wedding, there was no chaos. There were no florists screaming about shades of cream. There were no trucks backing up. There was just the sound of the wind and the distant chime of goat bells. We walked down to a secluded beach. We had invited 12 people. Julianne was there, looking relaxed in a linen dress, holding a glass of local wine. A few of my colleagues from Viridian Horizons, Liam's brother, people who knew me, people who loved me for the person I was, not the venue I could provide. I wore a simple white slip dress that I had bought off the rack. I was barefoot. The sand was warm between my toes. Liam stood by the water, wearing a linen shirt and trousers, looking at me with a love that felt like a safe harbor. We exchanged vows that we had written ourselves on scraps of hotel stationery. We did not promise to build empires. We promised to be honest. We promised to be kind. We promised to build a life that was ours, brick by brick. After the ceremony, we sat at a long table at a local taverna, eating grilled octopus and Greek salad, laughing until our sides hurt. There was no schedule. There was no pressure. It was the most perfect day of my life. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, I stepped away from the table for a moment of quiet. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out at the darkening sea. I felt a vibration in the pocket of my dress. I pulled out my phone. It was a notification from my bank app. Deposit received. Viridian Horizons. Quarterly profit share. Amount: $45,000. It was the first significant profit from the new design firm I had started after leaving my old job. It was money I had earned. It was money that came from my talent, my hard work, and my integrity. It was not a handout. It was not a dowry. It was mine. I looked at the number. It was a fraction of the millions I had walked away from at Rosecliff, but it felt heavier. It felt real. I thought about my parents in their cramped apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of their greed. I thought about Vanessa, selling lies to strangers on the internet. They were prisoners of their own expectations, trapped in a cage of their own making. I looked back at the table. Liam was raising a glass, looking for me. Julianne was laughing at a joke. These were my people. This was my wealth. I smiled, a genuine, deep smile that reached my eyes. I turned off my phone. I slipped it back into my pocket. I was no longer the daughter of Robert and Eleanor Ashford. I was no longer the sister of Vanessa. I was Madeline. I was an architect, and for the first time in my life, I was standing on a foundation that would never crack. They wanted a wedding of the century. I gave them a lesson of the century. And the price of admission? It was everything they had. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe even a beach like Madeline? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on how Madeline handled her family. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Sunday Drama Stories, hitting that like button, and pressing the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little bit of satisfying revenge in their day. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for the next drama.